For centuries, Europe thought it understood its conquerors. It was wrong. The mistake wasn't in the maps, or the battles, or the treaties sealed in blood. It was something far deeper, the name they were given, and the confusion that name dragged along for 1,000 years. Two completely different peoples, separated by centuries and by seas, were fused into a single image by historians who preferred simplicity over truth. And that simplification permanently distorted how the West understood its own origins. What you're about to uncover is not a minor academic dispute. It's the story of how the identity of an entire continent was built on a colossal misunderstanding, and how that confusion still shapes which nations are celebrated as heirs of greatness and which ones are quietly pushed aside. There's a question school books rarely dare to ask honestly. Who truly destroyed the ancient world, and who rebuilt it? To answer it, we must separate two forces that popular history blended into one. And once that separation is made, the map of Europe never looks the same again. But before we begin, I'd like to ask you to leave a like and subscribe so this family can keep growing. Hello, curious minds. Get ready. This is going to change the way you see the past. Welcome to Discovered History. In the year 9 CE, in a forest the Romans called Teutoburgiensis Saltus, 3 Roman legions, 17, 18, and 19, were annihilated in a 3-day ambush. 20,000 soldiers dead. General Publius Quinctilius Varus taking his own life. Emperor Augustus, according to Suetonius, smashing his head against the palace walls, shouting, "Varus, give me back my legions." The man behind the massacre was Arminius, a Germanic prince of the Cherushi. He had served Rome, earned Roman citizenship, learned Roman tactics from the inside, then used them to destroy Rome's attempt to push north of the Rhine. Teutoburg wasn't just a military disaster. It was the moment Rome decided the Rhine would be its final northern frontier. West of the river, Romanization, cities, law, Latin. East of the river, the Germanic world, its languages, its gods, its tribal structures, untouched by Roman control. These peoples, Franks, Saxons, Alemanni, Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Burgundians, Lombards, were the Germanic tribes. They lived in continental Europe long before the Vikings existed. Their migrations in the 4th and 5th centuries shattered the Western Roman Empire. In 476, when the Herulian leader Odoacer deposed the last Western Roman emperor, he didn't arrive with dragon-prowed ships or painted round shields. He did it with an army of Germanic mercenaries who had been embedded in Roman institutions for generations. The Germanic tribes didn't come from the distant north. They were already inside. 4 centuries later, on the coasts of what is now Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, another people began to move, suddenly, violently, and with a shock that stunned medieval Christian Europe. On June 8, 793, wooden ships with carved dragon heads struck the monastery of Lindisfarne in northeast England. Monks were slaughtered, relics stolen, altars smashed. Alcuin of York wrote in horror that such terror had never before come from the sea. This was the first recorded Viking attack. They came from Scandinavia. Their name likely comes from Vikinger, a term for those who launched seaborne expeditions from coastal inlets called Vik. They were not a unified people or a nation. They were Norwegians, Danes, and Swedes who shared language, mythology, and naval technology, but often acted independently and with different goals. Danes pushed into England and France. Norwegians settled Iceland, Greenland, and reached North America, Vinland, 5 centuries before Columbus. Swedes, known in the East as Varangians, sailed the great rivers of today's Russia and Ukraine, reached the Caspian Sea, traded with Baghdad and Constantinople, and founded the political core of what became Kievan Rus, the historical origin of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. The Viking Age lasted from the late 8th century to the mid-11th. It didn't end because they were defeated, but because they integrated. They converted to Christianity, settled, and became Normans in France, kings in England, imperial guards in Byzantium. Part of the confusion is visual. Strong northern warriors, metal weapons, expansion, similar climates. Hollywood, 19th century novels, and early national museums blurred the images into a single archetype, the northern barbarian. But the deeper reason was ideological. In the 19th century, German Romantic nationalism desperately sought ancient roots. Historians like Friedrich Ludwig Jahn crafted a narrative of continuity between ancient Germanic tribes, Viking Scandinavians, and modern Germans. It was politically convenient. It framed the Germanic peoples as the founders of Europe, the racial and cultural bedrock of Western civilization. The problem? Historically, it was fiction. The Germanic tribes of the migration period and the Scandinavian peoples of the Viking Age were not the same. They didn't share the same political systems, and didn't speak the same languages, and had followed completely different historical paths for centuries. The Germanic tribes moved south and west, absorbed Roman culture, adopted Latin, Christianity, Roman law, and Roman administration. The Vikings remained outside that Romanized world for centuries longer, and when they finally attacked it, they were attacking the very societies built by the descendants of those earlier Germanic tribes. In other words, the descendants of the Germanic tribes and the Vikings fought each other for more than 200 years. In 845, a Viking fleet of about 120 ships sailed up the Seine toward Paris, the heart of the Carolingian kingdom. King Charles the Bald tried to split his forces to attack from both riverbanks. It was a disaster. The Vikings crushed one column, hanged over 100 prisoners in front of the other, and broke the Franks' morale. Paris was besieged. Charles couldn't defend it. He negotiated. He paid 7,000 pounds of silver, an astronomical sum, to make the Vikings leave. It worked. This was the first of many payments. In England, the tribute became known as the Danegeld, the Danish gold. It was essentially the first permanent tax in English history, created to fund defense against Viking attacks, or to pay the attackers to go away. The irony is brutal. The Romanized descendants of the Germanic tribes that destroyed Rome were now paying tribute to Scandinavian warriors their ancestors had never met. Germanic tribes and Proto-Scandinavians shared a distant linguistic ancestor, Proto-Germanic, spoken between 500 and 200 BCE. From it came continental Germanic languages, German, Dutch, English, Frisian, and the Nordic languages, Danish, Swedish, Norwegian, Icelandic, Faroes. But by the 9th century, a Frankish speaker would not understand a Danish Viking. Their languages had diverged too far, like Spanish and Romanian today. Genetically, Northern Europeans share some ancient markers, but these reflect a common past from over 2 millennia earlier, not a shared identity in the Viking Age. Science confirms the distant connection. It also confirms that by the 8th to 11th centuries, they were distinct peoples. The Germanic tribes were the accidental builders of medieval Western Europe. They preserved Roman law, administration, the church, and Latin. The Vikings were the connectors of the medieval world. Their trade networks linked the North Atlantic to the Mediterranean and the Islamic world. Kievan Rus, founded by Swedish Vikings, became the largest state in Europe in the early 10th century. When Prince Vladimir I adopted Orthodox Christianity in 988, he drew the religious border that still divides Europe today. In 1066, William, Duke of Normandy, descendant of the Viking leader Rollo, crossed the English Channel and defeated King Harold II at Hastings. In just 150 years, the Normans had become fully French. They spoke French, built Romanesque cathedrals, and lived as continental nobles. When they conquered England, they fused French-Norman culture with Anglo-Saxon, Germanic, England. Modern English is the result, a Germanic base layered with Norman French vocabulary, sprinkled with Old Norse words like sky, knife, window, egg. The most spoken language on earth carries the imprint of both peoples that history confused as one. In the 19th century, the idea of a unified northern warrior spirit, the Volksgeist, was used to justify nationalism, imperialism, and, in its darkest form, the racial ideology of the 20th century. The confusion between Germanic tribes and Vikings wasn't just a scholarly mistake. It was a political weapon, and its consequences were measured in tens of millions of deaths. Today, archaeology, linguistics, and genetics have restored the distinction with precision unimaginable to 19th century historians. What popular history called the Northern Barbarians were, in reality, at least two distinct civilizations, each with its own values, politics, religion, and relationship to Rome. And between those two civilizations, not between Rome and the barbarians, the world we now call Europe was forged. Which legacy weighs more today? The builders who learned from Rome, or the navigators who connected worlds? The answer depends on which shore of the continent you're standing on. Remember to subscribe to the channel, leave us a like, and share the video with other history fans. You can activate the notification bell so you don't miss the upcoming videos we'll be releasing about surprising events or ancient civilizations that shaped the world we live in today. Thank you for staying until the end. And remember, here, we don't just tell history, we relive it together.